day, that no one should be judged by their worst day. 70 million Americans have these records. That means all of you have someone in your district that's struggling with this. This is an important issue for us all to work with. At this time, I'd like to invite our three panelists to the stage. Colette, Carolyn, and Keri, if you want to come on up and take a seat. I'll go ahead and introduce you as you make your way up here. This panel is really going to be fantastic. They're going to provide such a wealth of information that's really fantastic perspectives for us as we continue to learn about this important issue. We're going to begin with Colette today. Colette serves as the Director of Indigent Defense Training and Reform for the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. She works really hard on training lawyers across the country on these important issues of indigent defense. She works with our organizations on pretrial release, workloads for lawyers, all of these incredibly important issues. And she spent the last 25 years of her career defending poor people accused of crimes. It's not glamorous work, and it's often not fun work, and it's certainly not short hours, and she's devoted her career to it, and we're all better off for that. So we're going to hear some great stuff from Colette. Carolyn, if you want to take away Carolyn. Carolyn will be following Colette. She is the founder of the Messages Project, and this is one of the most extraordinary things that I've ever heard of in all of my work in criminal justice. The Messages Project, as she's going to talk about a little bit more, but it's a way that incarcerated people are able to communicate with their children outside of the prison walls, and it's extraordinary in its effect, not only on children and families, but on the offenders themselves. So she's going to give us some more details about that. Carolyn has been recognized by CNN as one of the international top 10 heroes of the year, which is extraordinary. And she's been given countless awards from Virginia, the Bank of America, across the country. She's been working on these issues, and so she's going to provide some really fantastic insights for us. And then finally, Keri is going to come up on stage. Keri is right now a wonderful journalist with the New York Daily News. She's worked with Ithaca Times. She's someone who's going to provide us some really fantastic information. I'm not going to spoil the punchline here, but she's going to give us, I think, a really impactful view of the criminal justice system. So we can't wait to hear from her. And with that, Colette, please come on up.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I'm going to talk to you about indigent defense. And as you just heard, I've spent the last 26 years as a public defender, as a criminal defense lawyer, representing poor people from Massachusetts to Seattle, Washington. Many of you might recognize this person. That's Clarence Earl Gideon. And in 1963, he appeared in front of a judge in Florida, and he asked for a lawyer. He was charged with a crime he didn't commit, robbery, and he begged the judge, please give me a lawyer. Judge says, no, you have no right to a lawyer. He went to trial, he was found guilty, he received a 5-year prison sentence, and as he sat in his cell, he took out a pencil and he wrote a motion to the Supreme Court of the United States demanding a lawyer under the 6th Amendment, and the Supreme Court agreed. But where are we? 52 years later, and where are we in the criminal justice system? These are just some of the words that you hear when they talk about the public defender, the indigent defense system in America. Broken, unconscionable, unacceptable, unjust. The 6th Amendment guarantees that in all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to the assistance of counsel for his defense. And yet we know, because we heard the numbers, both from Jenna, 2.3 million people in jail right now, $80 billion spent annually, 14 million people arrested every single year. 80% of them are poor and need public defenders. The system is broke. In the last year, I have been really going across the country trying to see where are we and how did the system get so broke? Why is it that in some of your states, 75% of the people that are incarcerated for pretrial? That means they're presumed innocent. And what we have been looking, and we're talking about data-driven statistics, that who is in our jails? Many of them are for low-level offenses. We heard from the representatives Peterson and Jones Some of the people are incarcerated for minor infractions such as driving while license suspended, minors in possession of alcohol, minor drug offenses, clogging our systems and held on unreasonably high bails. So what we have been doing for the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, how can we reduce those numbers? Doing pretrial release reform, studying who's in jail, using risk assessments that if you're a low or moderate risk defendant, you should be released from custody. We're trying to figure out how we can make the system better. I've traveled across the country and spoken with public defenders who have crushing caseloads, representing hundreds of people charged with felonies. In 1973, they had standards for indigent defense, and they're crazy standards that should not be acceptable anymore. You should have no more than 150 felonies. And yet we know that with all of the increase in forensics and the difficulties and complexity of cases, 150 felonies is unreasonable. Public defenders have hundreds and hundreds of felonies. Crushing caseloads, no resources, unable to get experts or having any training to teach them. We heard of the young lawyers that go into court and they're representing right out of law school someone that's charged with a minor infraction that is facing life without the possibility of parole. They don't have the training to represent some of those clients, and yet no one wants to fund public defenders. And if we want to have a fair and equal system, we must look at these resources and fund our public defenders. You heard Jenna and you heard Representative Jones talk about collateral consequences. 50,000 collateral consequences now. The ABA has looked at it. There's, on the ABA website, if you go on and you look, there's a map of the United States. You click on your own jurisdiction and you will find out that there are hundreds, thousands of collateral consequences. And it's not so if you're charged with a minor infraction, when you get out of jail, that's when the silent sentences hit. You can't get a job, you can't get professional licenses, housing, Medicare, Medicaid, immigration consequences, parental, your rights to have your children, your kids are taken away. I've heard of young men and women that get out of jail, they're clean, they try to get a job, they can't. They are now the parent that stays home with their child, but they can't volunteer at the school because they've got a conviction. There's so many hidden penalties. What about other things that are hitting the criminal justice system? We look at the statistics of those who are drug addicted and mentally ill. 1 out of 4 people that are in prisons in America have mental health issues. I can guarantee you, in your jurisdictions, your jails and your prisons are the largest psychiatric facilities in your state. I have been a public defender, I have been a private lawyer for 26 years. I have represented thousands and thousands of mentally ill people who are in jail. I really encourage you all to read the New York Times articles that were published this year, the New Yorker article about Khalif Broder, who spent time in Rikers Island. He entered at 16 years old, innocent, and charged with a robbery. And he wouldn't plead guilty because he was innocent. He was held there for 3 years in solitary confinement for over 400 days, got out, committed suicide. It was the system that murdered him. We had Senator Grassley that had the Senate hearings, and when we say we are at a wonderful time where we have bipartisan support. But Senator Grassley asked for other folks that were in the system to talk, and we heard that so many people that are incarcerated for minor infractions. He said that we are become the modern day debtor's prison. We are in crisis. We know about the racial inequalities, and again, I ask you in my short period of time to read Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow. The criminal justice system has become the new Jim Crow. We look at the statistics of who is being placed in jail. We know that the numbers of folks that use marijuana is the same between white people and black people, and yet we know the numbers of who is arrested, 10 times more likely to be arrested if you're black, 3 times more likely to be incarcerated if you're black. We have to change those numbers. Police brutality, I can tell you, it's not something new. We've heard about it from Eric Garner, Michael Brown, Sandra Bland, but this has been going on in this country for hundreds of years, and I can tell you my own anecdotally, starting in Massachusetts, ending up in Seattle, Washington, it's been going on as long as I've been practicing. In Seattle, Washington, an unexpected place. The Department of Justice just a few years ago went in to study the Seattle Police Department and came out with findings of excessive use of force and disparate treatment for our clients of color in our communities. We are impacting individuals, families, and communities. We can be better. Our founding fathers said we have the right to counsel, effective assistance of counsel, and I am so encouraged by the people that are in this room. In my last minute, I want to just tell you briefly that there are courtrooms across the United States where young, poor men and women are going in front of judges without representation. I sat in a courtroom in South Carolina where a 67-year-old grandmother was faced with shoplifting charges. She appeared before a judge and she said, I want a public defender. And he says, you can't have a public defender. You were supposed to have a lawyer. We're going to trial today. I want a public defender. Well, we're going to have a trial right now. And an employee from Walmart and a security officer stood up. He swore them in. What happened? This woman came into Walmart. She tried to steal a cupcake and a piece of meat and leave without paying. Officer, what happened? I arrested her. Is there any restitution? No. We were able to restock the items, and she was arrested without incident. I want a public defender. She's sitting there crying, please, Your Honor, give me a public defender. Oh no, you have been found guilty. And in less than 2 minutes, the 67-year-old grandmother was found guilty. She was placed in handcuffs and she was taken into custody. No representation. We're better than that in this country, and it was devastating. You'll hear from my panelists here about the impact of that. We're women, we're strong, we are vibrant, and as Caroline and I said this morning, women get things done. So I am looking for you guys to fix the system. We should not be a system that is a Department of Corrections. We should be a system of rehabilitation, of second chances, to fix the system, to get people out there and vibrant members of our society. I'm sorry for babbling, but I'm just so excited to be here with all of you. So thank you, and I'll answer any questions.
Well, good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Carolyn, LeCroy, and we were talking this morning, and it's like, how do I put my past 20 years into 8 minutes? Well, I'm not real sure, because I can talk and talk and talk and talk, especially when you get me on the subject of the children of incarcerated parents. But before I go there, I want to give you a little bit of background. In 1995, I was arrested for possession of marijuana with the intent to distribute and a conspiracy charge. In 1995, I went to court. I had a paid lawyer, so you know, and I received a total of 55 years. I'm from Virginia. All of that got suspended for 6 years. I was immediately taken to jail, and January 1st of 1996, I was transferred to the Virginia Correctional Center for Women in Goochland, Virginia. I like that one for a name. Anyway, I was there. That was one way to start a new year. Anyway, in September of that year, I had a parole hearing. Now in Virginia, when we had parole, only about 4% of our entire population was making parole. I actually made parole in 14 months, so I served a total of 14 months in between the jail and prison. Now I want to tell you, before that, my background is in film and video production, and I'm a producer and a director, and I still do a lot of that work. However, now getting back to where we were, while I was in prison, I was very fortunate. It sounds a little weird, but my children came to visit me all the time. I have 2 wonderful sons and a wonderful ex-husband. Some of them can be good and understanding. And I would come down on weekends when they'd come, and I'd sit there and I'd visit, and it was so wonderful just to be able to see my children. Now, my children are older, so they grow. But needless to say, that year, I missed my son's college graduation. I missed birthdays. I missed all these things, and I wasn't there for my son when his girlfriend tragically was injured and he was going to pieces. Now, I can't tell you how, and I'm sure as most of us are parents, when our children are hurting, we want to be there for them. And when we're locked up, we can't be. Those were incredible minutes that I will never forget. I don't let it define who I am. I don't let that prison time define who I am. But I don't forget it. And I've used that in a very positive way. When I would go back to the floor of the dorm, I would see women sitting around who never got visits. And it was like they were depressed, they were angry, they were hurt. And when you have those kinds of emotions, when you have those kinds of feelings, along with being locked up, being told what to do every day, you act out. Many of them acted out. Well, one thing I didn't understand at the time was why they weren't getting visits. My children came, my goodness. And, you know, I said this last night, unless you have been involved in the criminal justice system or working on criminal justice reform, you really don't know. You think you do, but you don't. The general public does not know about the criminal justice system. The general public doesn't know about prisons and what goes on inside. What they see is what's on television. What they read is what's in the newspaper. What else they read are in the books. So where do our children get their impression of prison? Anyway, I got to thinking, you know what? If these women are so angry and so depressed about not seeing their children, what about the children? And once again, at that point, I didn't understand why they weren't getting visits. Of course, I did after I got out and I started doing research and all this. But I knew right then I wanted to do something. Didn't know exactly what I wanted to do or how I was going to go about it. But I knew I wanted to do something. I wanted to make a difference. When I got out in '96, and it was actually beginning of November, so I was home time first night for Thanksgiving, which was probably the happiest and most thankful Thanksgiving I've ever had. And I'm very thankful every year. But I thought, you know what, I'm going to take my career as a film producer, and I'm going to get a camera, and I'm going to go in, and I'm going to film the moms sending messages home to their children. Little naive me, still thought, you know what the heck, I can do this. We ran up against, we got absolutely clearance all the way up, and then 1 week before we were ready to go in, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Ron was our director at the time, he pulled the rug out from under us. Had everything lined up, the volunteers, the cameras, everything. Well, I have the tenacity of a little pit bull. And I decided, I'm not giving up. So we finally got in, and we actually went to our maximum security prison for women in Troy, Virginia, Charlottesville. And we started filming. We did 50 women, 125 signed up to do this. So our first ones were done in 1999. We have now expanded to 14 prisons in Virginia alone, men and women, moms and dads. We expanded and added books so that the parent can read a book and the book goes home with the DVD. We are now in 5 other states, including Oklahoma. We are in Nebraska, we're in California, Missouri, and 2 years ago we went international, and we are filming the moms who are in prison in Malawi, in Africa. We're looking to expand. It's a wonderful project. We have filmed over 9,000 videos. And very quickly, they get 15 minutes each. That's a lot of work. That's a lot of work. But it's so worth it. Children's thing. We've had research done at the College of William and Mary and the University of Virginia, Virginia, have done research on the project. They have gotten wonderful results. We get wonderful thank yous. One in particular, and I see I only have 1 minute left, but one thank you I want to tell you about was we did a message for one of the moms in Florida that we had contact with her children for 13 years. She sent that video. Well, her children were angry at her. I mean, there's multiple reasons, and we can talk afterwards, but she said, I don't know if I should do this. I said, do it. Talk from your heart. 2 months after they got the video, she received a letter from her oldest daughter, and they have started to rebuild the bond that got broken. That's what this is about. That's part of it. The other part is these children are the silent victims of their parents' crime. These children have done nothing. And the collateral consequences that these children face are incredible. The consequences that the caregiver faces are incredible. These videos and our work in reentry helps to cut recidivism rate, but it also helps to cut your next prison population with, in many cases, these children. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
To the criminal justice system. I was indeed, as the story says, a Cornell student with an awful lot of drugs on me. I was using drugs at the time as a heroin addict, but that was where my addiction ended. Where it began is a little more difficult to say. I grew up in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, in the heart of Amish country. My mom's teacher, my dad was a lawyer. It was a pretty normal upper middle class upbringing. I went to a small private school, got straight A's, worked at a diner a couple summers. It was all pretty normal except for one thing, and that was figure skating. It's not going. Oh, it went too far. There we go. All right. From a young age, I was an elite competitive figure skater. I left school around 10 or 11 every day to train, and I stayed at the rink until 5 or 6 at night. Figure skating was my whole life. And the thing is, I was actually good. I skated pairs, which is where the guy throws you around and it looks really dangerous and stuff. And we competed at nationals twice. And, it was my whole world. I mean, it was my past, my only present, the only future I could imagine. And then my pair partner decided he wanted to branch out and find another partner, and I just fell apart. Every night I cried in my room for hours after practice, undoubtedly driving my parents completely crazy. And after a few months of that, they suggested that maybe I should go to a college summer school. Harvard had a program and they knew that I wanted to go to an Ivy League at some point, and it was also near a major skating training center. So it seemed like this would be a good idea, like maybe I'd sort of get my stuff together and stop just being a complete basket case. But instead it meant that the first time in my life that I had total freedom coincided with the point at which I was already beginning to fall apart completely. And fall apart I did, with zest and zeal. I started using drugs that summer and continued to do so off and on for the next 9 years until I got arrested. Slow. There we go. When I got locked up, I knew nothing about the criminal justice system, like literally nothing. I didn't know what an arraignment was, I didn't know what an A felony was, I didn't even know if my charges were actually serious. But they were serious. I mean, $50,000 of heroin is not a minor charge. But when it came to sentencing, I was lucky in a few ways. For one, I was lucky that I was white. Statistically, white people fare better in sentencing. And I mean, there's no way to say specifically how much of my outcome was related to race. I think it's fair to say that it certainly was a significant factor. Secondly, I was lucky geographically. I was lucky that I was arrested in a liberal county with a long-standing interest in progressive sentencing and alternatives to incarceration. If I'd been arrested half an hour away, I probably would have done 10 or 20 years. And finally, I was lucky in terms of the timing of it. New York State was home to the draconian Rockefeller drug laws, some of the harshest, well, first super harsh mandatory minimums in the country. And I got arrested a year and 3 months after a large part of them was repealed. Had I been arrested a year and 3 months earlier, I would have gotten a mandatory minimum of 15 to life. Instead, I got 2.5 years. And I ended up serving 21 months with good time. So I got released in 2012, and at the time I had no idea that there were people interested in criminal justice reform. I mean, on the inside you don't hear about these things, so I didn't really know it was even like a thing. I knew the system was really messed up. I knew that there were a disproportionate number of black and brown bodies, that there were way too many poor people, that a lot of the people there needed treatment, not punishment. And after watching all my friends keep coming back, I knew that it just wasn't working. And I wanted to change that. Of course, in the meantime, I needed to get my own life together. I had started working, writing trivia questions for like $4 an hour online. That was the first job I was able to get when I got out. And after about a year of similarly low-paying jobs, I caught a lucky break. There was a woman, Glennis, she's an editor at the Ithaca Times, and she was looking to do a story on women who had been locked up in the local county jail. And someone connected us, and so she came and drove out to the country to interview me, and before coming, she Googled me, and she was like, I read some of the stuff you've written before, and you're good, and we'd like you to write for us. This cooperating at all, they're totally ignoring me. There we go. That was my first story for Glennis. It looks like an incredibly boring headline, and it was not maybe the most exciting meeting ever. I was the only member of the press in a town for a town board meeting in a town of 5,000 people. But I loved it, and I started freelancing more and more, and eventually I got hired full-time there. At the same time, I started getting into prison reform, hooking up with local and statewide activist groups, serving on the boards of some nonprofits, and writing for other publications about prison issues like reducing the use of solitary confinement and getting past ban the box legislation, which is legislation that helps minimize discrimination against felons in the hiring process, or also there's ban the box movements in higher education. So yeah, and that's something I wrote about, ban the box in higher education. One of the last things I got done before leaving Ithaca was getting ban the box on the agenda at the county legislature, which I'm really pleased that they're looking at that now. They're talking about it. But overall, those two things, writing and activism, have been huge for me, and they're two of the things that have made successful reentry possible. They're both sort of all-consuming passions, and they sort of replace that part in my life that was once filled with figure skating and then later sort of filled with heroin. So one of the things that I thought I could do when I got out was try to offer other women the same opportunities that I had. And that is Caitlin. Caitlin is probably one of the best success stories I've had out of the jail writing class that I started at Glennis. In San Ithaca, so it was a small jail, so it was a small class, but we started a website to publish their writing, and with Caitlin, we actually managed to land her some paid writing gigs, which is really great. Though I'm still in touch with Caitlin, she's upstate in prison now, and we're staying in touch, and she's still writing. Unfortunately, I had to stop that writing class because I moved a couple weeks ago. As she said, introducing me, I write for the New York Daily News now. Which is really cool because this is one of the papers that covered my initial arrest. So now I've like come full circle and I'm writing for them. So I'm just really pleased that now I have the opportunity to talk about these issues and these issues that matter on a national platform for a larger audience. That's all I have.
Thank you all so much. That was truly incredible. We are so lucky to have educated us on this. And I have some questions for y'all, but before I jump into that, I have to say, one of the things to start with what we said, our criminal justice system should be based on luck. You should be getting different outcomes based on if you live in one jurisdiction versus another. There should be more fairness, more justice, right? So my first question is for all three of you, and we'll start down at the end with you, Colette, and we'll work our way this way. So as you know, our audience here is almost all legislators. And in years past, in decades past, criminal justice policy discussions have often included a lot of empty rhetoric. And one of the things that was talked about would be the acquisition of some between soft and hard. How would you respond to a legislator who is interested in these issues but afraid of getting attacked by that old rhetoric?
You know, I just want to say, you know, sorry. Oh, hello. I'm just so delighted to start with, you know, Representatives Peterson and Jones because, you know, the rhetoric has always been soft on crime, and that's very difficult to combat. But we need to be smart on crime, and I think that that's got to be the new language that we use. When people in our jurisdictions understand the amount of money that we are spending on a system that is broken, and that instead we can put the money into diversionary programs, rehabilitation, mental health programs, and then giving people a second chance. So I think that it's the verbiage, the language that we use, and the statistics. You know, what we have found, one of the biggest programs that we're working on now is pretrial reform. And when you start looking at who's in prison, and that you can release so many low and moderate risk defendants with no impact on public safety rights issues, and no issues about returning to court. Those are the two things that we look at. And so we save a lot of money. We have people that are released from prison, go back to their jobs, don't lose their jobs, their housing, their families. When we start talking about data, statistics, and saving money, that's when we'll be smart, not soft on crime.
Yeah.
I think we need to share. You know, everything she said was in my head. So somehow she read most of it. Smart on crime. We've got to be smart on crime. And I think by using the research and talking about practices that have worked, EBP, evidence-based practices, we know that work. We will not only cut down on prison population, but we'll really cut back on recidivism. So instead of, we were talking last night, and I was talking about this woman. I actually, the job that I have a job besides the project, and I work for the Department of Corrections. And I have a woman who wrote a $300 check. Now in Virginia, $210 is a felony, and you're going to prison. So I have a woman there who's sentenced like 5 years. They suspended all but 3. We're spending $27,000 a year for this woman who wrote $300 worth of bad checks to keep a roof over her children's head and some groceries in their belly. When, if we look at it logically and we look at it as to save money, put her on probation. Let her pay that check. Let her pay that grocer. And it's not costing us $27,000. I think if we talk about money and where we can save, we're going to get people's attention. And that is being smart on crime.
I think that the accusation of being soft on crime is only a problem if you believe that being tough on crime actually deters crime. So we need for people to understand the data behind this, and that long sentences, for instance, do not actually correlate to lower crime rates. So I think part of this is about getting the numbers out there to understand that being tough on crime is just not working. And we have to admit to ourselves that we're not being tough on crime for the sake of public safety. We're being tough on crime to be vengeful.
Excellent. Thank you so much. My next question, down to the end to you, Colette. What is the biggest misconception that people have about indigent defense and pretrial issues like that?
One of the statistics that was just so, like I said, I was a serious felony lawyer for years as a public defender and then in private practice. But what has changed in the last 12 months for me is really the emphasis on misdemeanors. And just the vast number of people that have their lives ruined on minor infractions. And I was just reading so much of the literature. The Arnold Foundation published a report about spending even 24 hours in custody. And I always said to my clients if they got arrested, hey, we'll get you out in a couple days. And what the Arnold Foundation found is that even 24 hours for a low risk or moderate risk defendant could have life-altering ramifications. The recidivism rates go up, losing jobs, family, being charged with these minor infractions. I think when people say, oh, it's just a misdemeanor, that has got to be out of our language now, because that's where we're seeing devastation. We're seeing communities simply destroyed. And we have the statistics on Ferguson. That is happening everywhere in this country. So I really ask for you to look at who's getting arrested in your communities and how we can maybe decriminalize some of these infractions, make them civil infractions instead of criminal. Really looking at what the quote-unquote minor, low level, that's the crisis in indigent defense.
Carolyn, my question for you, what about the incarceration of women and individuals and families? What do we not know? What should we know?
I think really important is they love their children. And I hear it quite often as well, if they hadn't have done so-and-so and such and such, they weren't thinking about their children. No, they weren't. Their lives at that point were out of control. Doesn't mean they love their children less. But I think one of the hardest part for the children are, number one, they need to know that mom or dad's safe. First and foremost. Once again, where do they get their idea of prison? They get it from shows like Oz or Lockup or truly. So they're real concerned about their parents' safety. The moms feel guilty. And for many of them, I'm not saying they shouldn't. I know I did. I felt very guilty. I left my children. But for smaller children, and it's like, she abandoned me. Well, that's not really so, and that's not really true. The families go into crisis modes. Now, for most of our children, most of the moms, the children will go to the grandparent. That's the largest majority. Most of our grandparents are on fixed incomes. So now we've impacted them. They're raising another family. We've impacted them not only financially, but think about it socially. You know, Grandma wants to go to church, to her bingo game, and now she can't go because she has to take care of these children. I know that sounds pretty petty, but you really need to think about the impact that the incarceration has on the entire family, which in turn affects the entire community. And you need to remember, 90-some% of our offenders are coming home. They're coming back. And that again impacts the family. With the children, I want to get back to the children very quickly. Think about the trauma that they've just faced. True story. Gentleman in one of my cognitive, in my therapeutic community said to me, he said, Ms. LeCroy, because I was doing a parenting program. He said, my son was in the bed. One of my sons was in bed. My other one was sitting on the couch with me. I was reading a book to him. And the cops came and busted down my door. Guns drawn, screaming, get down on the floor, get down, get down, get down. Think about the trauma that just happened to that child. Then they drag daddy off in handcuffs. They've got mama on the floor trying to handcuff her. Think about what we're doing to that child. Then he's going to go to foster care or grandma. And for many of them, if they go into foster care, if there's more than 2 children, they're going to split them up. So now we've caused another trauma. So it goes on and on. The impact of incarceration on the children and the families and the community is tremendous. And we can stop this by passing some legislation, by getting these programs in.
And Keri, for you, I'd like to know what is the biggest misconception that we have about the incarceration of drug offenders and the treatment of drug offenders as well?
Well, that it works. I mean, I don't think people think that it works in the long run. I think people understand that, you know, there's a high recidivism rate, especially amongst drug offenders. But I think that there is this misconception that it works in the short term, that if you send someone to prison, that forces them to be sober for some period of time. It does not. It does no such thing. I mean, I could get heroin delivered to my bedside in prison. I knew people that came in with drunk driving charges and weren't drug addicts and left as heroin addicts. You know, so I think it's important to understand that this is not some safe space people can go to, like, dry out or have some enforced period of sobriety.
And finally, for all 3 of you, what is the most important first step a legislator could take this week to begin making their state's criminal justice system fair, more effective, and more cost efficient? Starting with
Yeah, I think just familiarizing yourselves with some of the issues that are faced in your jurisdictions. I mean, knowledge is power. I could say that I've been an indigent defense expert for 25 years. That was wrong, because I didn't know what some of the crises that we're facing people down on the ground. So finding out who's in your jails, finding out what the resources are for the folks in your community, finding out more about mental health treatment, diversionary courts. You know, there's a thrust nationwide for specialty courts, whether that's something that your jurisdiction is interested in pursuing. Speaking with judges, prosecutors, defense lawyers on the ground to find out what the system is willing, able to do to make sure that you have the best systems in your states. Montana, you talked about having a fully funded statewide public defender system. That's something that we should be looking at. So there's a lot about just simply education first, and then talking to the folks in your community.
Wow. I mean, that really nails it. That nails it. Get to know some of your returning citizens. Let them talk to other legislators with you, or come and testify or give your statement before your General Assembly. Let them do it. We have statistics. We have drug courts. We have, in Virginia, we have a mental health court. Drug courts work. reentry and reentry programs in the institutions if we don't give them to them before. Reentry should start the day they walk through those gates, not wait till the last 6 months. We have people with 30 and 40 and 50 years, and they've got to start somewhere, and they might as well start at the very beginning and keep using those skills throughout. I think pushing for programs and reentry and resources is what I would suggest that they would do.
Well, I think if your state has mandatory minimums, you should get rid of them. But also, I think we need to make sure that we're not damaging people as much as we currently are when they're behind bars. We do a lot of things that are pretty much guaranteed they're going to be worse when they come out, like the prolonged use of solitary confinement. And you can pass state legislation to limit that, and there's some states that are considering it. New Jersey and New York both have bills that would significantly alter the way in which solitary confinement is used. And I think it's really important to understand how damaging this is and how putting people in solitary confinement is not preparing them for a successful reentry at all. Also, you know, college programs. We used to have a lot of college programs in prisons, and since the 90s, a lot of those have died out. There are still programs. You know, Doris Buffett's got a great foundation that funds a lot of these. But there's been a lot of studies about the correlation between getting higher education in prison and reduced recidivism rate. And I think a lot of people just don't want to fund education for prisoners. You know, it's not something people want to spend money on. But I think it's important to understand that we need to put some money into giving them tools during their stay to actually be successful upon their release.
Excellent. Thank you all so much. Can I please have a round of applause for us? At this time, I'm going to invite the two legislators who joined us earlier to the stage, and we are going to take questions from all of y'all who have it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. Can you hear me? Yes, good morning. First of all, I'd like to say, having spent 33 and a half years in criminal justice myself, 28 years in the Public Defender's Office in Miami-Dade County, Florida, many of those years as the Chief Investigator, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for helping me to thank them. I say thank you because finally, flashlights are becoming lights and beacons of hope. And because they are, we as ladies will definitely rise to the occasion to do what is necessary to improve quality of life issues even for those in prison. My question, however, will go to the young lady who has the indigent program, the director of indigent. That's Colette, right?
That's me.
Colette, and you guys did an excellent job in your presentations. The only challenge is I've not heard enough about a focus on mental health issues and challenges.
You know, so I was in Syracuse. I'm trying to do training for public defenders and private assigned counsel nationwide.
Yes.
And we went to Syracuse because of the Hurrell Herring settlement offer in New York. And I spoke about mental health issues. It is my passion. You know, racial profiling, selective enforcement, mental health, that's my bailiwick. That's what I care about. It is a crisis.
It is.
1 in 4. And you know, it's the spotlights in some of these. You know, when someone says to you, in every state in America, that the jails and the prisons are the largest psychiatric facility, that is the truth. And so what I've done as an indigent defense, that's a hard word to say.
Yeah.
I'm trying to educate public defenders how you recognize the signs and symptoms of mental health issues, how you can facilitate treatment for your clients, how to talk to prosecutors and judges about who this person is. Right. That when they act and comport with their diagnosis, they're not criminals, they're mentally ill. There is a difference between that. So we as Americans have to be able to understand what the differences are, that in the 1950s when 500,000 people were in psychiatric facilities, why are that now in 2015, 600,000 people in jails and prisons?
Absolutely.
So I will take every opportunity that I have to speak in any forum that we are in crisis because of mental health issues. So, and if you want me to come in your states, I will do that, but thank you so much for that question.
Okay, you're welcome. Thank you for the answer.
Good morning. I stand here really, I'll tell you, very conflicted, and I'll tell you why. Previous to my elected position, I spent 29 years in law enforcement, retiring in 2009. And I have to tell you that during that time, I think one of the things that we're leaving out here, and you'll see by the end of my speech, you'll understand where I'm coming from, is the power of police unions. Okay, I think that's the one thing we haven't touched on. I being a member of that police union. But in saying that, I, in my career, worked with child abuse cases, sexual assault cases, and worked extremely hard to bring social workers and police officers together, to work together. Because although we go in a different direction, we are running on parallel rails. And I don't think that there's enough of that being done. I think we're off doing our police work and they're off doing their social work, but yet we're going in parallel lines. Also, another point I want to make is after retiring, I'm still absolutely stunned by the amount of women that still are not entering police work. Because as we see here today, we as women think differently and we do things differently. And I think that that's one of the things that I, as an elected official, I'm going to work on. But I have to tell you, getting back to the point of police unions, when I was elected, I questioned the fact, and I'm asking everybody in this room to help me with this, about the exorbitant amount of cost that was going into building of a jail. And when I did that, the telephone calls came in. What are you doing? You're one of us. And, I mean, so that is where I find my position extremely hard. I worked for making sure that families were taken care of. You were talking about, when we come to the door and we knock on the door. What I made sure of is that previous to that, there was a social worker available, okay? We knew if we had to take children where they were going to go. I wanted to put down the trauma of that, and I don't see enough of that. I don't see enough. So, I guess my question is, and I think the question was already sort of answered, is a elected official now, everyone in this room, please help me, because I am a member of the police union, but I think differently. So, okay? So if you can answer that question or help me with any of what I just posed, I would appreciate it.
The only thing I would just add briefly is that there's some jurisdictions, like in Seattle, they're using the LEAD program, L-E-A-D, and it's training police officers to work with social workers and to go in and do that when they meet low-level offenders, that they have programming in place and they don't arrest, but they get sent to treatment. So that police officers training in those areas to work collaboratively with social workers is something that we could be doing nationwide.
I wanted to, I'm State Representative Virginia Goodwin from Tulsa, Oklahoma, and absolutely appreciate the comments that you're making. And I think someone mentioned the whole issue of an understanding of knowledge. Oftentimes when we're trying to even think about legislation, there's a mindset that says, well, they shouldn't have committed the crime in the first place. Well, let's back up. Right now we're dealing with the case in Tulsa. There are 15 and 16-year-old guys. They were changing the tire, 2 black guys, in front of their own home, changing the tire in their car, family car. There's an alert that goes out that there's been an armed robbery. Police come around the corner. The first 2 black guys they see are these 15 and 16-year-olds changing the tire. Did not commit the crime, but they're sitting in jail right now for armed robbery. So I hope that we would think that we have, in America, it's true, we have issues as it relates to race. And did somebody commit the crime? And we've got to open our minds and say, we do have race issues in America, and we got to think, maybe those guys did not do that. But now they're charged with armed robbery. They're sitting in jail, having difficulty getting a lawyer, okay? But if you look at it on TV, you're going to say, two bad black guys, they just committed a crime. And I'm just saying, if we just begin as women, and first of all, hope the God-fearing folks, let's just open our minds and say, maybe they didn't do that. Maybe we have a culture here in America that convicts folks before they even get to trial. So then you think about, as you all talked about before, pre-trial and all that. What are we doing with the amount of time that they spend in jail just trying to get some help? So I'm concerned about the amount of time that these folks are spending in jail just waiting on some kind of justice. And like I say, it begins in this room and it begins in America with us just having a dialogue saying, maybe, just maybe those folks are innocent until proven guilty. We are working in Tulsa with police chiefs, former police chiefs, because you're absolutely right. Can't be an us against them kind of dynamic. It's got to be us working together. We're working on that.
Thank you. Senator Linda Collins Smith, I'm Vice Chair of Judiciary in Arkansas, and I'm proud to be here. I have to ask my first question to Representative Jones. We are in Arkansas as well. We are doing a criminal justice reform. We did some this year, or in this session, and we're doing our task force at least for the next year. And one of the things that I'd like to ask you, some background. I'm a business owner, self-employed for almost my whole life. Lodging and real estate is what I do, among many, many other things. So my question though, my husband is a circuit judge, so we have a lot of interest in this area of reform. But when you talked about youth and then cleaning their records, I have a question do you have I guess I want to say, what crimes or what offenses are not going to be cleared that your state is not going to say the public doesn't have a right to know? That will be my question specifically for you. And then I want to say about vindictiveness to this young lady. I have been the victim of a person who was a thief that took our big bad boy mower and trailer, drove off with it, $10,000 approximately. If I were vindictive by knowing who that person was, I might send someone down to take care of business themselves. But we didn't do that. We lost our insurance coverage because, why? I had a claim. With that, we lost our coverage. So we had to go with another insurance company, which the cost has increased. And we know who the person is. We did not get our items back. So I'm looking out also for the safety of the citizens, as well as a legislator who has to say fairness and the second chance in jail, when they get out of jail. But I have to also look at, you have to do some type of penance. You have to be accountable for your actions. This person will go to jail for a little while, and we just pay more for the items that he should have never taken. That's just an example to you that it's not vindictiveness, it's frustration. And it's, there was an offense to us, not just me, to other people. And we hear that all the time. So it's a balance that we have to have as legislators and as lawmakers, or as a judge who has to sit in a seat and make a decision. I do think that you have to make those decisions based upon what is the crime. And that's where we have to look at that. Drug courts do work. Arkansas, we just put more money in all kinds of drug type or rehabilitative jails. For instance, we never would allow funds in the past, or our state didn't, for faith-based programs. Now there will be Arkansas state taxpayer funds going even in faith-based or alternative programs along with our drug courts. So we really are working on things to help rehabilitate people and put them back in so that they can be, you know, great members of society. We all want that. I want that. Thank God my children haven't gotten in trouble as adult children. They could have. But thank God they haven't, so I would want that opportunity for anyone. But please, Representative, if you could tell us about what your state's doing. What are those limits that you're using?
Thank you so much for the question, and it's the one that comes up quite often. And so realize that if someone committed murder, if someone was a violent offender and committed a heinous crime, they would still be in jail. Okay? So these are young people who have committed crimes that they may have gotten a year, they may have gotten 3 years, they might have even gotten 4 years of a sentence, and they are now out, they're back in school, hopefully, which would have been a part of what we would have requested, that would have been a part of their sentence, and their repayment is that you go back to school, you get your GED, you get your high school diploma, you stay out of trouble for a period of time, and then we will work with you to make sure that you can start your life over. So there is a list, I don't have it here with me, but we can get that to you. But there are a list of crimes that, well, they wouldn't be able to, but they wouldn't be able to because they would still be behind bars. So we're talking about young people who are committing crimes that you heard through our panelists, that many misdemeanors, they're going to jail for a significant amount of time when it really wasn't necessary for them to be in jail and for us to pay for them to be in jail, but that we should have been doing something else in order to make sure that long term, that we put them in a better situation, that they learn from their mistakes, they complete whatever the sentencing is, and then that they be able to move forward and then not be a part of that recidivism that we keep hearing about, that recidivism that negatively impacts the family, that negatively impacts the community on a long-term basis. I haven't looked at the data, but what I will tell you is that when we start to talk in these circles about the various crimes that are being committed, and you start to put race in it, you know, for marijuana, for an African American, they're going to spend more time in jail than a non-African American. And so if a kid has some marijuana on them and you arrest them in jail, but when they come out, they still have that on their record, you know, I can't say that I did it, but my brother says everybody smokes marijuana at some point in time in their life. So we have to be able to identify opportunities that will ensure that long term we're putting ourselves in a better situation, and it's not costing us astronomical amounts of money to put programs in place after the fact because they're going to still be incarcerated, or that they will again continue to reoffend.
And if I could just really briefly address the second part of your question, because I think it's an important one. I think that the word that we need to be thinking about and focusing on is holding people accountable, truly accountable. And there absolutely are some offenders for whom prison is what holds them accountable, and is what our criminal justice system needs to be focused on. But there's others that we know that holding them accountable will be a little bit different. So in the situation that you laid out, maybe it's making that person work off the debt that he owes you, so that you can get your lawnmower back. I mean, like if I were in your shoes, I would rather have my lawnmower back than have someone spend time. So it's about tailoring it to the case to make sure that we're holding everyone accountable.
And to make it clear, I use that as one example. I choose myself. The citizens want to be safe, and they don't want what they've worked hard for taking, and they don't want many things to happen. So we just have to look at safety, and I just wanted this young lady to know it's not vindictiveness to want that accountability, and so there are many ways to get it.
Absolutely.
Hi, I'm Judy Koster from the state of Nevada, and I've been involved in the earliest criminal justice system of public school in my life. So I just, as a vice principal, you know, you work with vice, that's your job, which took me on a drug policy journey, because 9 times out of 10, the children, the high school kids with whom I was working every day, underneath the presenting issue was their use of drugs. So I just want to mention that, and mention also an attitude that exists in schools often called no tolerance. And how what we're talking about today in this room also needs to be communicated in that world, because those attitudes begin very early. So any comments you might have about schools, juvenile justice, and criminal justice, and how we can work together in terms of policy?
One of the things that I'll share with you is that, you know, we talk about a lot about the school to prison pipeline, and that if we aren't conscious and cognitive of all of the things that are going to be affected by how we address some of the issues that we're facing, then that school to prison pipeline will continue to grow. So my hat is off to you being an educator. I vowed I would never go in a classroom and would never take an education course, because it takes a special person. And so I commend you for that, but also recognizing that you're in a place where we want to be able to grow and mature them, recognizing that they are not what they will ultimately become if we place in them what they need early.
I'm Senator Barker from Minnesota, and I've been working for the last 3 years on the mental health, decriminalizing mental health in our state. And I've done a lot of research all over the nation about what other states are doing. Every state is in the same predicament, and I know we talked a little bit about that. But it is, we can't have corrections reform without having mental health issue involved in that, and having corrections and human services work together to make that happen. And Shakopee Women's Prison in Minnesota, 70% of our prisoners have mental illness. 70%. And in the men's prisons, 30%. And that's only self-reported. And that's why I think there's a big difference between what's reported at the men's and the women's prisons. I've even gone to Florida and looked at your Central Receiving Center in Orlando, and it's an amazing deal. The police just, when they pick up low-level offenders, they bring that person into a crisis center rather than bringing them to jail, and avoid the jail record altogether. Then they follow all the way through, right back into the community with medication management and the whole business. It costs about 1/6 of what it would cost to bring it to jail. And it doesn't make sense. And the federal government and state government says we had to cut budgets. That was always the first place to go, was to the mental health funds. And now they're gone. And it is truly a crisis in the whole United States. Someday people are going to look back at this and say, did you really put people that had a medical condition in jail for having a medical condition? I mean, it's barbaric. So I really, I thank you from Florida for, and I understand that Miami-Dade is building another one, and then there's 2 good examples in Texas as well, San Antonio and Houston now, and then New York City is building 5 collaborative centers like this with private, public, government involvement, and it's really a combined effort and an excellent way to go, and to follow through all the way with the person. That's how we can stop putting people in jail and eventually in prison, because they go to jail, they get dropped off, they get a cold release. That's the end of it. Nobody follows them through after that. So I just wanted to let people know how important that issue is, and I know you spoke about it. I'm glad to hear that you did, because we've got to get those folks out of prison and save a whole lot of money in the process.
What a fantastic note to end the panel on, because that is absolutely one of those proven effective alternatives that we know that can protect public safety and control costs at the same time. So thank you for highlighting those. Before we wrap up, I just want to say a couple thank yous. First to Jody and NFWL for having us and for sponsoring this conversation with us. It's such an important one, and I really hope that it continues. I want to thank Sarah, who is an amazing panel coordinator and did all the behind-the-scenes work, and she's awesome.